I'm Mark Halperin.
I'm Campbell Brown, and with all due respect to the Rubios, slow and steady wins the race.
All right, my favorite. In our lane tonight, Iowans gun their motorcycles, the caucus gets souped up, and the Rubios rev their engines. But first, Hillary's rivals go all turbo. Yesterday in a Texas speech, Hillary Clinton called out a handful of Republican gubernatorial types and their states on the issue of voting rights. And today, that handful of Republican gubernatorial types returned the volley. Listen to the words of Chris Christie, Rick Perry, and John Kasich.
Secretary Clinton doesn't know the first thing about voting rights in New Jersey or in the other states that she attacked. And my sense is that she just wants an opportunity to have, commit greater acts of voter fraud around the country.
She just went into my home state and dissed every person who supports having an identification to either get on an airplane or to vote.
In Ohio, we have 28 days. In New York, where she's from, they have 1 day. Now, why are you suing me? Why don't you go sue your own people? Why don't you take care of business at home before you run around the country, using these kind of demagogic statements that we don't want people to vote? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So Kasich there was referring to a lawsuit brought by Hillary Clinton's lawyers against voting laws that exist now in Ohio and Wisconsin. Speaking of Wisconsin, Scott Walker's team told us about Hillary Clinton, that her extreme views are, quote, far outside the mainstream. Campbell, these pushbacks, very aggressive by all of them, how effective are they going to be for these Republicans against what Hillary Clinton did yesterday?
I think Kasich's in particular is very effective, and it makes no sense to me. Her lawyers are bringing this lawsuit in Ohio where they have 28 early voting days. And in the speech yesterday, she called for 20 voting days. So they're suing in a place where they have a policy more expansive than what she's calling for in her own speeches. It almost makes me think that whoever wrote her speech, there was a typo or they didn't do their homework and they actually made a mistake, because it makes no sense. And it's easy for them to call her out on it.
And, of course, they're pushing for equal voting rights from their point of view in the battleground states, but not here in New York, which historically has had, not just in terms of early voting, but just horrible voter laws and ballot access and everything else. So I think on that point they're in good footing. And look, as much as yesterday was a success for Hillary Clinton because Democrats love this issue, Republicans get all fired up on this issue. So for these Republicans, they're seen going after an issue that base Republicans care about, and they get to take turns competing to see who can bash Hillary Clinton the hardest.
It's a little tricky, though, for Republicans. I do think it's a potent issue for her. I mean, she has to get African Americans, minorities energized. But at the same time, Republicans, even though they can push back hard and say, don't demagogue us, they have to be careful and walk a very fine line here and not make this a general election issue.
Yeah, it ruins their brand.
On your Marcos, get set, go. With the sound effects. Yes, go, and read the kind of weird New York Times piece about Senator Rubio and his wife racking up 17, count them, 17 citations on the road, like speeding and running red lights. Marco got 4, Jeanette got 13. Mark, what is the significance of this story?
Well, one thing is it shows that people are going to go after Rubio hard. Now, Rubio is the rising candidate. There's some people even who support Jeb Bush who think Rubio is the man to beat right now, a person to beat. Media is going after him. Interest groups are going after him. It's been revealed today that liberal Democratic research group pulled these same records. And the other thing is it shows that people don't think Mrs. Rubio is off limits, because the Times went just as hard after her as they did after her husband.
I wonder about the issue a little bit, I have to say. It's not parking tickets. I mean, this is kind of irresponsible. Yeah. It is speeding. It is reckless driving. It's running red lights. And then the solution to it is look at the lawyer they called. It's Better Call Saul. It's a guy who's advertising, hey, don't pay your parking tickets, call me. And it makes me, it sort of underscores, I think, what you're hearing some Republicans say about him, that there's an immaturity. If this is all that the other side has on him, then it's probably not going to do real damage. But if this is the tip of the iceberg or the beginning of the kind of Oppo research that you're going to see being leaked out over the weeks and many months to come, then, with no pun intended, put on your seatbelt. I think the Rubios, to your point, because his wife was also brought in, are in for a very rough ride.
A few weeks ago, month ago, everyone in politics had the incentive to take down Jeb Bush, Democrats, Republicans, and the press. That now has turned to Marco Rubio. And whereas there's plenty of scrutiny still to come for Jeb and Walker and for Hillary and all the others, Rubio is now the one in the barrel, and there is more stuff in the pipeline. his campaign didn't respond to the New York Times. They let the lawyer do it. He's going to have to answer on stuff like this, and they can't just hope it goes away, because the higher he rises, the more accountable he's going to be held. You
know what I'm hearing Republicans say about Rubio, though, is that they right now are trying to reconcile the Rubio of their fantasies with the Rubio in reality, which is they dream of the Rubio who is this incredibly talented communicator. They want to see him on the debate stage with a great story. They want to see him on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton. But they're also dealing with the Rubio in reality, who has shown sort of a weak constitution at certain moments on immigration, on Syria, where he was afraid to sort of get aligned with President Obama. So they are hoping that over the course of the campaign, there emerges, I think, a stronger, tougher Rubio than they're feeling right now.
We asked the Rubio folks for comment. They didn't get back to us on this story because, like you said, these are not minor things. These aren't parking tickets. These are reckless driving. The fact is, there's at least 3 Republican campaigns right now very much want to take Marco Rubio down and are doing a lot of research to try to bring it about. All right. Iowa Senator Joni Ernst is hosting a pig roast and motorcycle ride tomorrow in Boone. It's the first time she's holding this event, and it's getting a lot of attention. On the menu, besides the pig, 7 Republican White House hopefuls, including Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, Lindsey Graham, Mike Huckabee, Rick Perry, Marco Rubio, and Scott Walker. No Jeb Bush, but lots of other big candidates. Ernst has dubbed this event Roast and Ride. We kind of like the names Hogs and Hogs, but we're not from Iowa, so what do we know? Campbell, of the folks who are out there this weekend, who's got the most on the line?
I do think it's Rubio, because this recent poll, I think you guys have talked about it, that showed among caucus goers, he's sort of everyone's second best choice. The campaign is bolstered by those numbers. He hasn't spent as much time there as a lot of the other people. He hasn't sort of had a dazzling moment in Iowa, so this could potentially be a moment for him. The problem is this event seems tailor-made for Walker.
Right.
I mean, he actually rides a Harley.
And he's going to ride with the host, with Joni Ernst. I think when they give their talks, they're all given like 7, 10, 8-minute talks. I think for voters looking for the young new thing, the Rubio-Walker side-by-side, which Iowans really haven't had much of a chance to do, will be a big deal. The other person I think has a lot in line is Carly Fiorina. She is getting great buzz nationally and in Iowa, but if you look at our poll with the Register and you look at national polls, she is not budging. You would think that all this buzz, all this coverage, all this favorable word of mouth would lead to higher poll numbers. She hasn't gotten it, and time's running out for her in terms of national numbers for the debate, but also in terms of momentum and fundraising. She needs to move in the polls.
All right. Attention, bipartisan unity announcement. Today, Democrats and Republicans in Iowa announced that next year's caucus results will be reported and tabulated into a central, quote, mobile-enabled
cloud-based platform.
That promised accurate, efficient, and secure reporting. The mobile apps use Microsoft technology, so sync up your Zunes. If you don't know what a Zune is, Bing it. Mark, why are the parties teaming up on this?
Because the caucuses are in a bit of danger. The dirty little secret for years was that this thing was done in terms of tabulation and the vote count being phoned in by these precincts in a completely informal and haphazard way. And last cycle, when Romney and Santorum basically tied, that was exposed. Just like Florida 2000 exposed the national voting system, that exposed the caucuses. And the parties are smart to make this more like an election and less like a bunch of neighbors sitting around chatting.
But isn't that the heart of what a caucus is supposed to be?
You can take modern Microsoft technology and add it to the neighbor-to-neighbor thing. I think that in the past they've gotten off really easy. The caucuses aren't identical for both sides, but what was the same was a really cavalier, casual attitude, no rigor about elections. And at a time when there are all these questions about the sanctity of the ballot, the safety of the ballot, voter fraud, etc., the way they were running was ridiculous, frankly. And I'm glad both parties have wised up and they're teaming up, and I hope to heck that the app doesn't crash.
Well, and to your point earlier, given how close it was between Santorum and Romney, and given the number of candidates we're seeing this time, you could literally have razor-thin margins.
And not just for first, but, you know, if you say there's 3 tickets out of Iowa or 5 tickets out of Iowa in a big field, the differences down ballot could make a huge deal because just a few votes could matter. And again, no one involved in the party, in either party in the caucuses over the last 25 years, no one would deny that the vote count and the tabulation was extraordinarily loosey-goosey, and you just can't have that if you're going to have a credible event. Iowa is going to go first. They're not being challenged on the calendar the way they have in the past, but there's some chance, some worry that they'll be downgraded in their importance. They don't want that.
And again, because of the number of candidates, who comes in third or even fourth or fifth matters in a way it hasn't in the past, so you do have to know those exact
There's no way to know based on how they tabulated last time if Romney won or not, or Santorum. No way to know. And we'll never know. Lost to history. All right. Coming up, Caitlyn Jenner, Mike Huckabee, and the Bob Costa. Brace yourself for the Friday Culture Wars on With All Due Respect after this. Our guest tonight is a WADR favorite. He's the Washington Post, Bob Costa, who joins us now to talk about a story he wrote in the paper and on the web with Phil Rucker, his talented colleague, about a topic we've been talking about this week on the program, the culture wars. We talked previously about the reverberations of this story. You all write about kind of the intra-conservative, intra-Republican conflict over the Jenner story. What is the tension, and how roiling is it?
These candidates just don't seem to know how to respond, Mark. I mean, going to them for comment, almost all of them started off immediately an email and on phone call saying off the record they didn't want to touch this at all. They didn't want to have any kind of comment. And you've seen this on the campaign trail. No one's really weighing in. Even though the activists, they want the conservatives and the Republican candidates to step up and say something.
Why not? Why do you think, I mean, they can't sort of dodge this forever, right? This is a big story. So who, I guess, in everyone you've talked to has sort of come the closest to figuring out how to thread this needle?
I think Rick Santorum tried and then he fumbled. I think the problem for these candidates is that they all acknowledge privately and sometimes publicly that they don't want to fight the culture war, but they know that the Republican base is almost a sleeping bear that they don't want to wake up if they start going too far to the center on the social issues. So they're kind of boxed in when something like Caitlyn Jenner comes up because they know the country's moved on and many of them are embracing her, but the base really isn't there.
I got to ask you a question. It's good. Maybe sounds cynical, but it's really meant idealistic. You know, often politicians are accused of pushing an issue because the base wants it or it's good politics. Do any of the people who want to be the Republican nominee, do you think any of them are actually offended by Caitlyn Jenner? And therefore,
really.
they're not speaking. They're not actually offended.
No, I mean, Mike Huckabee makes jokes about it that don't go over well, and you have Rick Santorum being inelegant in how he's handling it all. But no one's come out with anger. But the problem is, they're not angry. They're not against Caitlyn Jenner. But when they listen to talk radio, who influences the activists, there is a lot of anger. So they don't know how to handle that, how to grapple with it, and how to kind of reflect that base frustration.
Is this an opportunity, too, for Hillary in the way? I mean, we're looking at voting rights we were talking about earlier, which is certainly a way for her to energize her base, a great wedge issue for her as she sort of tries to figure out what is going to get people most excited. Do you see her jumping on this?
Huge. They already are. I mean, the White House jumps on it. Valerie Jarrett jumps on it. Hillary Clinton jumps on it. When I emailed Dan Pfeiffer, he called me right back. Democrats are happy to talk about Caitlyn Jenner because to them this has become a litmus test for young voters, and if Republicans don't want to engage in what they think is a new litmus test for 2016, that leaves the Democrats able to make this argument that they're the party of the future.
What's incredible to me is this thing explodes this week. You know, transgender politics as opposed to gay and lesbian politics have not been a big part of our presidential debate discussions. All of a sudden, it's front and center. And unlike in the wars over same-sex marriage, this thing is just, as Bob's story clearly shows, this thing is great. Democrats love it. You know, not that long ago, Democrats would have been terrified of this. Now, the twist, Bob, is, as I understand it, Kendall Jenner says she's a Republican.
Caitlyn Jenner, that's right. Yeah. Kendall, I think, is one of the daughters.
Sorry, Caitlyn.
I get confused with the Kardashians myself,
sorry,
Mark.
Caitlyn is a Republican. So
yes.
You think any of these candidates are worried that they're going to get Caitlyn Jenner's endorsement?
Ben Carson was asked about this on the campaign trail, and he didn't even seem to know who Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner was. And so I think candidates, they like that Jenner is a Republican, but they're not as seizing on it because they don't want to talk about it at all.
Bob, in the end, what's your instinct? Is this thing stay hot in the context of the presidential cycle and in talk radio, or does it end as the weekend comes?
No, this is not ending. So Caitlyn Jenner may fade, in my opinion. But based on my reporting, you got all of the right and the Republicans, they're on edge about the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, and they thought with the religious liberty battles in Indiana and Arkansas and elsewhere, and with same-sex marriage, that the fight this summer was mostly going to be legal. Now they see Caitlyn Jenner as a cultural touchstone, and it's gone bigger than just a political and legal fight. That's what they don't really understand. How do they move forward strategically when something becomes cultural rather than just a legislative or legal battle?
I've heard some of them say they were hoping, actually, Supreme Court could sort of put this to rest for them and they wouldn't have to talk about it anymore if you kept it at the legal level. But you're right, this sort of opens it up in a way that they can't escape.
Yeah, and Caitlyn Jenner's not the first. I mean, if transgender issues are now some of the central topics in the American scene, not just the political scene, there's going to be more and more that unfolds. And if it is a litmus test, as the Democrats hope, that puts Republicans in a position where their silence eventually will not be enough.
Bob, of all the 17 Republicans who are running or thinking of running, which 2 or 3 do you think are most comfortable in public talking about these issues of sexual identity, sexual orientation?
The most comfortable, I think, is Jeb Bush, because when you see him on the trail, he always talks about compassion for people. He has an empathy that comes through that seems very modern, that seems like someone who's been in political winter and has seen the country evolve in a bit, hasn't been playing day-to-day social issues politics. I think he's a natural on that front. I think Rand Paul's pretty good as well, but his silence on Caitlyn Jenner shows that he, too, remains a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think you're right about Bush, and it's part of why I continue to believe smart Democrats see him as the most formidable in a general election, because if you can't talk about these issues in a modern way, in a comfortable way, in the context of a general election against probably Hillary Clinton, I think your chances of winning go way down.
I agree, and that's the Bush philosophy. I mean, Mike Murphy from the beginning said we got to run a general election campaign because the nomination's not worth having if you have no shot in the general.
No. Bob Costa, great story along with your colleague Phil Rucker. Bob, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming in.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, which campaign logo is the absolute worst? We actually have the answer for you right after this.
One thing that every single presidential campaign has in common is they all have logos. You probably don't know what most of them are, maybe Hillary's because of that huge arrow. Well, Allie Elkin printed them out. She took them to a guy who's basically a logo honcho to get the definitive ruling on which logos are good and which logos are terrible.
I wanted to find out what separates the good campaign logos from the bad ones.
I'm almost speechless on this one.
Sagi Haviv is a partner and designer at Chermayeff and Geismar in Haviv. Seems like a fun place to work. You've probably seen some of their designs. The Chase logo, Mobile, the Library of Congress, and many, many others.
In general, what makes an effective logo?
What it's meant to do is to help people remember you, for good or for bad. But a good, effective logo will be appropriate, simple, and memorable.
Let's talk about Ted Cruz.
What we can see, starting with the typography, is that there's a clear nod to tradition when he thinks about his strength with the far right and the religious conservative audience that he's very much vying for. But there's something extremely awkward about the cropping of that star. It's kind of a crippled star that is missing 2 of its limbs. It just is bad. What we look for is a magical moment where the image and the type are merged beautifully. They were able to, because it's italic, to create a negative space there between the A and the N and make a torch. The idea of liberty, which is very much his hallmark, is appropriate. So all around, pretty good concept and execution.
Marco Rubio, what do you think?
Going all lowercase is pretty smart. He's saying, I am the leader of tomorrow. The young one, very appropriate. However, the shape of the United States, which is a vast country, right? They shrunk it to the size of a dot on the I, and it looks like a little red whale there. What happens is when the logo is reduced, which will inevitably be reduced, it's just too small. Even on a business card, you can imagine how tiny that thing is going to be. He's one of the candidates that has a pretty good chance, but it's not going to be because of the logo if he wins.
Now we're talking about this The use of blue and gold.
I'm almost speechless on this one. I just don't know where to start. First of all, to pick the A of America instead of the C of Carson or something about his name. But what they did to this letter is criminal. From a language standpoint, to write Carson America doesn't make any sense. Is it Carson for America? Is it Carson's America? What is it? It's very hard to talk about this. It's the worst one. What I see here is that this is kind of a reactionary logo to the Obama campaign, echoed then in the visual with his tagline, "We're leaving hope behind and we're going to higher ground." But can you really go the distance with something that is just a reaction to someone else's legacy? To keep this thing going will be a mistake. So here we find a very thin face. So it's a modern face. It's a sans serif. There is a kind of lighter touch, which may be trying to play on something more feminine. It could be. I mean, she has a very forceful persona, so maybe balancing it out. They put the star in the A because it fits there. Unfortunately, when you look at how they try to extract a kind of a visual shorthand, they extract the A.
It's Carly.
Exactly. She's not Arlie. It's not a traditional serif with all the thicks and thins. It's more of a slab, what we call a slab serif, which is a little bolder, a little simpler. It combines tradition and modernity.
And the fact that it's his first name, I just see it being on the door of like a kid's room.
A little childish, or I think in this case, maybe friendly, which also explains why it's Bernie and not Sanders. It is kind of not intimidating as a mark.
What are your thoughts on it?
It's very bold. The choice of the H as being a sans serif, a bold sans serif, says I'm modern, and the arrow saying moving forward. We've seen arrows, even FedEx, which is a very famous logo, has a silent arrow there between the E and the X. The other thing about this mark is that very strategically, it is not her name. In 2007, she had a big Hillary. Now it's just the H. More of a symbol for a movement and not to focus on her personality or her name.
I feel sorry for Ben Carson. Thanks to Ali Elkin and Griffin Hammond for that. We're going to be right back.
Great big weekend coming up. Joni Ernst event in Iowa, the Belmont Stakes, and the Tonys. Campbell, which one are you most excited about?
My kids' baseball game.
Yeah, I'll watch that too. All right, big week of shows for us next week, including Rick Santorum, Bernie Sanders' top strategist Tad Devine, plus a whole lot more guests, including maybe some presidential candidates. Remember, we're on twice a day at 5 p.m. Eastern and at 8 Eastern, or if using the metric system, like Lincoln Chafee, at 5 and at 8. Until next week, for Campbell and Mr. TV, Steve Yacina, we say sayonara.